Welcome back to just another solar podcast with Luke Beattie. That's me, and Karl Jensen.
That's
G'day,
me.
mate.
How you going?
Yeah, good, man. So there's been some really good news stories in the last fortnight. So we're going to go through that stuff, and then we'll introduce our special guests this week. One of the coolest things I saw today was at the Formula One Grand Prix in Vic. We've seen in the last couple of weeks that RACV has installed solar on the pit building there, which is really cool. And then today they'll post in about a sustainability hub where they've got solar and batteries there on display at the Grand Prix.
And gear plugged in.
Yeah, how cool is that, man?
Fantastic. Very good. And I see that Clenergy's got a ground mount array there, and there's concrete blocks. And, there's obviously a lot of planning and effort gone into that. I know how hard it is personally to run any kind of event, and that's awesome. Really impressed. Hats off.
Well, you were a marshal at a Formula One Grand Prix years ago, weren't you?
I used to do it every year. So I've got 8 Formula Ones as a track marshal under my belt. So there's nothing more exciting than a Formula One.
It's just really cool to see some of the local guys that we know and respect and getting out there and being on the world stage effectively.
Oh, you and I know how hard it is to put in a ground mount system, and even if it's only 5 or 6 kilowatts, to put it in and then be able to pick it up and pack it up and take it away again. It's just a massive undertaking, and I'm thoroughly impressed. It's great stuff.
Also, RACV acquired Kohler Solar, who are a big regional operator in Victoria.
Indeed. So that's another feather in the cap. At the end of the day, people buy solar systems from people they trust. So, they don't buy Jinko, they don't buy Trina, they don't buy Ryzen, they don't buy whatever. They buy trust in the person that's selling it to them. And hence why up front, people sitting down in your living room and talking about solar, your goal as a salesperson is to make that person trust you. And you do that with facts and data. And at the end of the day, people trust the RACV because they've been around for, call it 100 years. They're there for when shit goes wrong. If I can trust that someone's there when shit goes wrong, then I could probably trust them to put in my solar system. I think it's actually a good fit for that business to continue expanding and building that network of being able to install in more areas other than just the cities. And in Queensland, what happened there?
RACQ has bought a majority stake in Gem Energy, which Jack Hooper's also been on the show. That is a really good news story, probably touches on what you said about consumer trust. We just congratulate you, Jack.
Indeed. Hats goes off to Jack. That's the ultimate goal of any solar businesses is sell it to somebody else. Because at the end of the day, after we've been in it for 10 or 15 years, the ups and downs can get a bit tiresome. And at the moment, probably people are listening to our podcast thinking it's been a pretty tough 3 months. And looking at the STC data, we're looking at the worst quarter in many, many years. January, February and March down around 50% on the previous year. We've got a long way to go this year in order to have any chance of even matching last year for volume. And that's causing a whole heap of the industry to have a whole lot of pain. There's been a virtual power plant trial project launched by Solar Victoria around 3 weeks ago. There's 2,000 slots there. It's about a $700 discount off your battery if you sign up for a VPP. And in those 3 weeks, they've had a grand total of 28 people sign up for the VPP.
Could it also be the complicated nature of a VPP and being able to sell that simply to a customer? Because there's clearly lots of batteries being installed around the country, and you look at the data as a proportion, that's growing. Do you think it could be the complexity of a VPP sell?
I don't think that the VPP is particularly complicated. For me personally, if I was investing, let's call it $17,000, I think that a chip in from the network to the tune of $250, when they're going to take 25% of my annual cycles out of that battery for them to participate, I'm thinking it's not worth it. Well, if you were in it for a year, it'd be a winner. Get in for a year, collect the Solar Vic discount of several $100s, collect a few $100 from whichever VPP provider you select. You're up $1,000. After that, I think you're out. There should be more than 28 people on board after 3 weeks. It's just that value proposition. People feel that they're going to be locked in with their network operator, and their network operator or their electricity distributor, they're buying a battery to try and get away from them. So hang on, I'm trying to divorce myself from you, but on the same token, you want me to put a ring on your finger for the next 5 years? I'm not so keen on that.
So joining us today as special guest is Pejkic from Sydney Solar and Batteries. Welcome, Lily. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Look forward to hearing what interesting tidbits of information we can get about Sydney's weather at the moment, where it seems to be raining constantly.
It's miserable. I actually had 2 changes of clothes today. It was that wet on site. So we persevered. We went to one site, then changed, went to another. Then we're like, let's just keep going. We're already wet.
Have you been getting phone calls from the customers saying that their solar systems are underperforming after you've installed it?
Oh, no, actually, I got one yesterday. He's like, what's happening? I can't see any data. I said, is your internet on? He goes, no, but the plumber was here checking out my pool pump and he switched the power off. And I'm like, well, that'll be it. Turn it back on. I think people understand that the weather's miserable, but, they're still performing something,
Yeah, still doing something. The sun's still coming up in the morning and still making something. I watched Landline on the weekend and they said that the ocean temperature remains warm and we should start expecting tropical cyclones as well.
Oh.
Great. Just what Queensland needs, more rain.
Oh, no, but I feel for people like it's been very disruptive. I've had COVID for 2 years and then now we've got the weather. So, a lot of people are flooding, and if they're not flooding, they're still affected with COVID. Like COVID's like kind of coming back in. There's like a new wave now. So there's a lot of people sick and labour shortages and everything else, around Lismore, all that flooding. So,
and Karl just mentioned earlier on about how the STCs are down significantly for Q1. So the industry is down nationally. That also takes its toll because people are dealing with the disruption of COVID, the floods and storms and everything else, but also a soft industry.
And I think an industry that's heavily reliant on the sun, not only for performance, but to get the work done. And then the supply chains and moving stock in and out. It's quite quick, the industry, it's like quick turnover, like quick churn, like you're in and out on the site. And we're averaging like maybe 1 or 2 jobs a week. But what we're doing is, we'll go to one site, we'll do a little bit there, what we can, we'll go to the next site. And sometimes you go back to site 2 or 3 times and it's inefficient.
If you could put a number on it, Lily, what would you think the industry's down for the quarter?
I don't know what's happening. I feel like almost like Sydney's down 70%. That's my sort of feeling, just with operations, how it's like the workflow is going. I don't know how it looks across Australia. I don't know why the rest of Australia is kind of in a lull, if it's got to do with, there's a lot of factors like labour shortages, obviously sickness, COVID. Like the people that I know that are getting COVID now, they're out for like a solid week, they're sick. And then some people are getting the long COVID. I've got one electrician, he's struggling to come back, and he had it in January, and he can only do sort of like a few hours a day. And then he's feeling very fatigued, like, you can't focus. You're doing sometimes high risk work. He won't be able to get on the roof. He can only do so much. I don't know how to guess, maybe 40%. Is it?
The number for January and February was sort of half what it was January and February last year. I don't think the numbers are actually in for March yet, but my prediction is that it's pretty close to that. WA's been going along gangbusters because it's been 35 and 40 degrees every day for the last 3 months. So their industry over there is doing really well, which tells me that you're bang on the money. I really think that Sydney and Melbourne are down that 60, 70%. And that's what I'm hearing from customers. It's a lot harder to win work. The leads aren't coming through, I think, because the summer's been exceptionally mild and wet. People haven't had the big bills from the air conditioning to kick them in the pants and motivate them to go and get solar. And I think that's the real driver. Sure, COVID's in there, but I think people just haven't had big bills this year because the weather's been so mild and there hasn't been any air conditioning demand.
And I think the weather affects people's psychology when they're choosing a product like solar. So I noticed on Monday it was quite sunny and hot, and the phone was calling nonstop. You know, people were inquiring. As soon as the rain comes, that it's not on people's mind to get solar. I suppose they assume it's very wet.
That definitely makes sense.
Now, I want to jump across. You guys have been installing according to the new install standards, the AS5033. What's some of your feedback from that, the challenges, the good stuff, the bad stuff?
I suppose everyone's like, woohoo, no isolators, just one less part, but then you've got the labels, and then, you know, you've got to position, I suppose, your cables to that disconnection point. It's just, I suppose, following techniques. Maybe in the roof, you know, the keeping it 600 above the ceiling, sometimes that's difficult where it gets a bit narrow, and then you've got air conducts and all sorts of things going through, and you're like, which path do I take? I was in a roof the other day and I was like, oh, there's stuff everywhere. And I'm like, where am I clipping the conduit to? So
path of least resistance.
Yeah. And then you've got to like plan a few things. And I find that, you know, okay, with an isolator, you can kind of like, you put it at the end of the rail or somewhere. But now I'm like, where's easily accessible? You know, where if you had to get on the roof, you had to like disconnect, you kind of want to leave yourself enough room that you can just pull the cables out from under the panel and disconnect. I find a lot of the places sometimes in Sydney, they don't have that manhole. What do you do in that situation? Everything else, I suppose, is straightforward. The one thing I was thinking about the other day was the new settings on the inverter. It's got to be set because I received, you know, the CR will be like focusing on inverters that haven't got the new setting. Have inverter manufacturers made it easy for installers to identify, or just a quick way of checking that they've put in the right parameters into?
So most have given guides how you need to. A lot of them have a firmware upgrade, and also there's the necessary grid settings. So some of them out of the box, if you're buying it in Sydney, may have the correct default settings, but it may not. So if I can speak about Fronius and Huawei and the ones I know, they've released guides that tell you how to do firmware upgrades, what you need to do to be compliant to that. So I'd say that the answer is yes. If you're using reputable brands, I'd say it's good to speak to either them or speak to, you know, your wholesaler, distributor, wherever you get the gear, and chances are they're going to have that quick guide.
And of course, we've been spoilt by the internet. Most of us are connecting these systems to the internet. Certainly Western Australia, South Australia have now got mandatory network operator controlled limits or shutdowns, and therefore they have to be connected to the internet. So if you do potentially make a mistake, at least there's a good chance that someone can look at that remotely and make a change for you. Enfo is a great example there.
Yeah.
Change grid settings remotely.
And what about the site map? How are you guys managing that?
Site map's a bit tricky because sometimes you think an inverter is going to go somewhere and the customer's like, no, I want it over here now. And you're like, oh, great. You've got to go back to the office. You've got to change a few things and you've got to get it reprinted and laminated and put it out. Those little things like cost you a bit of time installing if it's not done beforehand, but sometimes things do change on site, especially like building sites. So sometimes you plan to have it outside, then it goes in the garage, and it's just those little minor things. That's probably one of the ones where I'm like feedback from other installers. They're finding it tricky to navigate because it's a little bit time consuming.
Now, moving back to your story, Lily, so you did your trade through AusNet and from there moved into sustainability and into solar. What motivated you initially and how did you find that part of the journey?
I suppose this isn't a career I set out to do. I never would have thought I'd be an electrician. So I was working for the power company at the time. It was Energy Australia when it was government owned. I was working in their call centre while I was studying environmental science. They were recruiting about 50, 60 apprentices a year, and they were offering their staff apprenticeships. And they asked me, and I was like, well, what am I going to do with an apprenticeship? I was like, I can't even remember the maths or anything. I'm like, I just let it go. I'm like, nah, that's not suitable for me. And then the following year they asked again. And I was like, why not? Like the conditions were good. I was like, this could be handy. I could do renewables. That's what I was thinking, something like that. And so, yeah, I finished my uni degree and I started my apprenticeship. I was there for like 10 years. I had a couple of kids during my apprenticeship. Yeah, so one thing led to another. And then at the end, I got bored with it. I wanted to do like renewables, like when I was studying, I could see the destruction that fossil fuels was having on the environment, on communities. I'm like, okay, well, how can I put two and two together? What can I do electrically and sustainability wise? Like, how can I join this up? And that's when I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go do a solar accreditation course. I did that. Then I went and did the battery. Then I left. I took a redundancy from the power company and I did a bit of environmental officer work there, EIA, for their development, stuff like that. And then I picked up some contract work and started solaring. Yeah. And
love the terminology, solaring.
Solaring. Yeah, I used to do just contract work and then I just got to know like builders, architects, just word of mouth like that picked up.
Did you come across any stereotypes about the female tradie?
Yeah, all the time. Like, because you had to go on rotation. So you'd have to go, with subs construction or protection, or, the EMSOs, emergency service officers. So, I'd go on rotation with one of the guys and, we'd just be driving in the van and like people think out loud and you'd be like, I guess guys can be hairdressers and I don't see why females can be electricians. Why they can't? And I'm like, what do you say? I was like, yeah. And then
at least he validated you, Lily. I wonder if he's hairdressing now. Maybe he ran with that as a career path.
I'm like, is he thinking of a career change? I'm like, it was like you're free to be whatever you like. I don't know where this is heading. He was verbalizing his thoughts. Yeah, I had another guy, like he was in charge of the wiring at substations and I was like 8 months pregnant and they sent me there and he's like, for fuck's sake, he's like, because I just had a guy that had a broken arm, now I've got you. And I was like, I can go, it doesn't bother me. He's like, no, forget it, just stay. And then after he's like, you know what, you've been one of my best workers and like, we're good mates now. But I was like, well, I just find that people find it so bizarre and so odd and so uncomfortable that I was just like, okay, well, what do you want me to do about it? We're either going to work together or we're not, But I find the most challenging things has been from customers. I'd turn up and they'd be like, oh, do you know what you're doing? And I'm like, I hope so, for your sake and mine. Like, I've got to do a job for you. And at the end, that like they're just really concerned. They go in the house, they don't come out. And at the end, they come out and they're like, wow, I'm impressed. And I'm like, well, what did you think was going to happen, A lot of the times I hid when I was doing contracting work, like people will call and they're like, hey, mate, I'm after the CEC installer. And I'm like, yeah, hi, it's me. And they're like, they just go quiet. They're like, what? Your husband? And I'm like, no, me. And so then they're like, oh, okay. Or they'd either just hang up the phone or they'd be like, oh, do you install? And I'm like, yeah. So I find customers the most challenging. And so, yeah, I hit it a lot when I was doing contract work. I'm like, no one can know I'm a female. I'm not going to get any work.
Quite the opposite. So Luke and I have been doing this for a long time. And one of the most outstanding people that jumped out at us was Kath Bourne. Mm-hmm. And she is now working for
Nika.
Yeah, Nika over in WA. She knew how to run a site. There was no doubt about it. She was kicking ass left, right and centre and throwing the panels down and telling the blokes what to do. She was in charge, make no mistake about that. We certainly stood up and took notice and said, right, she's definitely getting the job done here. There's no doubt about it. Luke and I both worked for Solargain and there were a couple of amazing female sparkies that worked for that business.
Well, there's a funny one, Karl. So Elise, who is now in executive management in the business, but at the time was a service manager. And one day she had a particular pointy customer who was being abusive to the staff and really, really difficult, one of those customers. So she gets on the phone and tells him, what the situation is, how we can fix it. And he said, well, I want to speak to your manager. And she said, I am the manager. He said, I want to speak to the man. I am the man.
I'm the man.
So that's the same attitude you see. But if you go and install a great solar system or do a good job, I mean, that's the best way to counter that. And touching back on what you said, I mean, if you can gestate a baby and do electrical work at the same time to a high degree, that's that's amazing.
No, but I even so I do a lot of work with like builders and architects by default, like I'll do a few projects and then they'll call us up and, I turn up to the site for new builders and that someone's introduced us and I turn up and they're like, they don't look at me, they grunt, and I'm like, okay. And then after a while, all the technical stuff and, we're like doing measurements and, okay, we're going to put this here and it's going to go like this and then after, it takes like 4 or 5 times I've been there, I've talked to them and then I call up and they're like, hey, Lil. And I'm like, oh, now he saved my phone, my number in his phone, I'm like, oh, now we're getting to a level like, so it's almost like sometimes you have to prove yourself, which is unfortunate. They normally talk to my apprentice, like when I turn up and he's like, oh, just talk to the boss and they're just talking at him. He's like, I told you, talk to the boss. And socially, like we're still evolving. And a lot of the times, like if people haven't experienced working with women in the field or in the trades, they find it challenging. I'm not big, I'm not muscular, I'm not tall, but you don't have to be that. Like I don't work by myself, I work in a team. Like we all have our skills and techniques and our capabilities and we all contribute and it's not like I don't carry panels up the ladder, like I'm never going to be able to do that, but I rope them up, there's other different techniques. What I've found is like I think in trades itself, like especially men, it's like they have to be strong and fit and they've just got to go on and on and on, you're expected to perform. Maybe that's why like a lot of men in the trades get like a lot of problems. Like they've got back problems, they've got knee problems, they've got other problems. And then
so like a bit of ego driving something like that, you mean?
Like society's conditioned men in trades to be like endurance and stamina and you've got to be fit and you've got to keep going and going. And then maybe that's where the mental health issues stem from too, because if you do have an injury or if, you're not at that level, people sort of judge you. And then you don't feel like, your self-worth. You're like, what's wrong with me and why? Like for my electrician to say, like, I'm really tired, I can only do a few hours. Like I find that a lot of guys won't do that. It's like that the trades doesn't give you that space to be who you are and work to your ability. It's like always like you've got to outperform and be better and do 14-hour days. And that's not suitable for everyone,
At the end of the day, I'm sure someone's got to come up with a better idea for panels, given that they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There's got to be a better way. We don't want to be hurting people. And I notice a lot of the manufacturers are bringing out 54-cell panels now. So we're theoretically easing up in size a little bit, but they're 415 watts and they're no more efficient than they were before. So they've still gotten bigger again.
Yeah, they're using like the 210 mil cells, which makes the panel much wider. Might not be as tall, but it's still, you've got to grab it that way as well. And that's one of the issues, isn't it? Not so much the height. When
it becomes wider and then long, they become awkward. I suppose, when guys carry the panels or even when I carry the panels, like I suppose longer because you can pass them up like the Trina 400s. Yep. They're like nice to pass up. I think I did a 350 the other day. I was like, oh wow, I'm just throwing these up like nothing, Some of the other times I'm like, I need a little step ladder with the guys, I'm like, I'm struggling, grab it. And I think, what, like everyone, like going into safety, right? So everyone speaks of safety like industry-wide, but it's kind of like the customer still kind of dictates how safe the industry is, because if everyone's like shopping around for price and that, it's like, where do you factor safety into that price? Some of these budget systems, where is safety in that? Is it in your quote? Do you have to specify that, okay, if you don't want to pay You get your own safety equipment and make it safe if you need edge protection or whatever like that. I find that often discussed, and as much as we can talk about, like heavier panels, wider panels and that, but the customer, when they're looking bottom dollar pricing, I'm like, I don't think they're thinking of safety or, it's not back on them. It's always back on the installer.
I've got a lot to say on this stuff. So in Victoria, the addition of Solar Vic, whilst there's a $1,400 rebate, most of that $1,400 rebate these days is soaked up in admin and safety. You can't do almost any job without edge protection. And there's a lot of operators that would these days be classed as dodgy operators that just weren't able to operate in that environment, and they've left the industry. Mm-hmm. And there's absolutely no doubt everyone I talk to in Victoria is absolutely adamant that work safe, work cover mantra that's gone with Solar Victoria has definitely transformed the industry and improved the level of safety. If it's a case of winning the work versus not winning the work, I would say safety absolutely has to come first. And as a director of a business, that's your utmost priority. And certainly every business that I've ever worked in has supported the health and safety of their business right down to mental health. I worked for one particular business for 3.5 years, and the boss used to walk through every morning, tap someone on the shoulder. How are you going? Anything that I need to help you with? How's the wife? How's the kids? Is there anything that you need to do today? Do you need to pick up the kids from school? And that improves the mental health of the staff out of mind. And one of the big challenges for our industry and every other industry is maintaining good staff morale and keeping people coming back to work. I don't believe that money is everything. I think that money is a minor part of work. And when you look at studies, people aren't as focused on money as people really believe. And that simple walk around on the way through, picking up a coffee and chatting to the staff on the way through the office, on the way to your office, adds to the morale of the team and the happiness of people in the workplace enormously. And I think that's the very grassroots of health and safety is having people wanting to come to work. So if someone does get injured, they wanted to work, they respect the business, they don't feel like they've been flogged, they're all the more likely to say, well, shit, I made a mistake here, I was a part of this, as opposed to being out for blood and basically ruining your business, which is definitely possible if someone has an accident.
And on that, on the mental health side, how do you see the work-life balance in this industry?
I think that the industry will take as much as you'll give it. And that's speaking particularly to small business owners. You hear stories. We had James Taylor on last time, and he's found a work-life balance, but he was talking about working till midnight and just it was never ending. When you come back to what Karl and yourself were saying about the overall picture of health and safety, which includes mental health, finding balance, it's just as critical to have some time with your family and to check out sometimes. You can work a 10-hour day and not get everything done. You can work a 12-hour day. You can work a 20-hour day. You can not sleep at all. And there's still going to be stuff, particularly for small business owners, that they won't get done. Putting those stakes in the ground and working out, what's important to you. There's still going to be times where you have to work late or do something above and beyond. But for the most part, you need that time. You need the social time, the downtime, the family time. Karl and I are fortunate to interact with really hundreds of companies and people around in the industry. And you see both ends of the spectrum. Some guys who give the bare minimum and they get that in return. And then you see the guys who absolutely competent and flogging themselves, flogging their crews, and then everything in between. And you see that there's a band of companies that have found that balance. A lot of the stories of people who have found balance come from the story that I worked too hard.
Yeah.
The cracks were showing. Extreme end, it's divorces and that sort of thing.
Don't tell me about it.
Yeah. And sometimes it's closer to the centre where they recognise that cracks are showing earlier on and they take the mitigating steps.
What advice then of what you've seen, what's worked and what hasn't worked in the industry for small businesses, what advice would you give others to sort of not enter that endless cycle?
Can I put it back to you, Lily? Because I think you've been on a journey to finding that balance and you're the guest.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put that question back on you.
So it's exactly what you said. It's just you notice that things aren't working and that you're becoming a bit of a monster because you're like this robotic machine and you just work, and efficiency and getting deadlines and jobs done and meeting quotas, and you expect your people to perform and to act like you. And then I found myself getting disappointed. I'm like, well, you're leaving. It's like 5 o'clock. I'm like, we're staying until the job's done. What's wrong with you? When I was doing that contracting work, like I just found that it was 7 days. Some jobs were there till like 9 p.m. Whatever it takes to get it done. It's like I didn't see my kids. And then, you go to grow and then you're like, you need more time. You need to invest more time in the business and training staff and stuff like that. I think COVID has really opened my mind up and I'm like, you need to restructure, you need to get your life back. And it was an opportunity to go, okay, what's important? Like, who do you want to work with? What kind of projects do you want to do? I found a lot of the time with me, I couldn't say no. Like saying no is a big thing. It's like, I've got to fix everyone's problem. And I'm like, well, it's not really my problem. And I'm like, okay, now you're taking away from time from my kids. Now sort of I've turned it around. I'm like, okay, when someone asks me to do something after hours or something, I'm like, okay, is it reasonable? Is it an emergency? Or are they simply just taking my time away from my kids? And I found that, like, I do whatever it takes. Saturdays, Sundays, I'd miss all, like, my kids' events and sports and stuff like that. So I've really just I've culled a lot of work and just taking on projects that are, I suppose, more viable. Some things I found that I was taking on, I suppose as a small business, sometimes you take on work that's not viable because it's just another job. You're entertaining people. You've got all these staff. You've got subbies and that, everyone calling you. Like at one stage, several people will call me a week. They're like, do you have work? I don't have work. I've got other companies calling me. Their guys don't have work. And I'm like, yeah, send them across. I'll find work. And I'm like, what am I doing? I'm like a surrogate.
So importing more problems. You've got enough on your plate, then you import more.
Yeah. And I was like, this has to stop.
Coming back to you were talking about the guys carrying stuff and having to have stamina, even when they may not be well mentally or physically.
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing. Like, it doesn't matter if you're driving a desk or you're on a roof throwing panels. Being able to recognise when you pass that point and to either say, I need help, or I need to step back or pull back somewhat, that's the challenge.
Yeah, it's quite challenging to say no, like, especially for me. I'm like, it's a foreign word. The more you put in your boundaries and the more you can say no, then it becomes easier. What I find now is networking with other installers, local installers. So, if I don't feel comfortable or confident if we can deliver on their project, I'm like, you know what, we're a little bit busy at the moment, but how about you call this guy? He's local as well. Give him a call and he might be able to help you out. You can't see other, I think, installers as competition. I don't see them as competition. It's more collaboration and then helping each other out. During the week, 2-3 times a week, we might call each other. We're like, I just had this problem, like just sharing your experiences. I found that's helped as well.
I think the best phrase Andy McCarthy used on the podcast was co-opetition. It's really cool to hear that you're doing that. Also, am I right in saying that you've found a better balance?
100%. Like, because straight away you don't feel guilty for saying no. If you are too busy, like, and someone else isn't too busy, like you've referred them work. I think people feel like, if you give them a lead like that, all of a sudden, like, they're going to take all your work and all your leads and all the word of mouth referrals. No, it's like everyone's got different skills and like, I like my fiddly building work, architectural work and stuff like that. Other guys are like, I don't do any builders. I don't work with builders. They're just time wasters, Yeah. So everyone's got their strengths and we can't be good at everything,
So Lily Pejkic from Sydney Solar and Batteries, thanks for coming on board, sharing your insights. It's been really good.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Lily. It's great to put a face to the name. Before I let you go, I'll mention Dolores, my boss. She said to put in a special hello. She's been in the industry for 30 years now. Whilst she's not on the roof, she employed some of the first people in Australia for BP, physically soldering cells together on a bench. She really respects your input to the industry. We're really rapt that you can wave the flag for women in the industry. I mean, there's a large number of women in our industry that are unsung heroes that are running the books, that are running the business. I think they're highly valued in our industry, even though they might not
throwing
be seen.
panels, following wiring diagrams and spending time on the phone on hold to tech support.
And we don't hear about it. That's why we've got a WISE, just to network for with all these women, like all these brilliant women in the industry that we've not met and not heard of, and we don't know what they do. They're all out there. They just need to come forward. And
we just want to shout out to any women who are listening to hook up with the WISE, Australian Women in Solar Energy, because they're doing great things. Lily's a part of that. We just want to thank you for listening. Please click subscribe and share to anyone who may enjoy it. Thanks again.